It's Friday morning, April 24th, and I'm in my last field of corn, hopefully getting ready to plant, but I seem to be fighting with technology at the moment. I pulled the tractor out of the shed earlier, and I was going to let the GPS converge while I was loading some seed on the pickup, and didn't have the clutch stuff all plugged in, so it errored out and said it wasn't working. So I restarted, and then I didn't have GPS at all. Although it looks like I restarted again, and maybe we are getting closer. So the way this works, I'm actually running on Iowa DOT RTK, which is cores. So I get the correction signal through my phone on internet, and then Bluetooth over to this guy in the corner of the cab, which gets the signal into the monitor, or actually I think it goes to the root module to make it accurate. So I'm just looking at the screen on here that's showing me the GPS stuff. So we're degraded because we don't have RTK yet, and we're getting signal through. So I just need to wait for that to converge, and then we should have pretty accurate signal. I screwed up yesterday and started planting a field without turning the RTK correction on, and then I did, and it jumped a bunch, so I had to kind of manually run the road shutoffs for a bit. Thankfully, it was just a small area. But it's a pretty good chance of rain this afternoon, so I'm going to get to it. So right now we're planting through some of the new terraces that I worked down a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago? I don't even know now. So it was pretty chunky when I field cultivated it, or especially when I disced it and when I field cultivated it also. But it seems to be planting really nice. I think it had enough time to kind of get rained on a little bit, and we had that snow. And then the chunks or the clods are pretty dry now, and they seem to be breaking up nice and packing in right around the seed, making a really nice seed bed. So I think that was a good call. Just thought I'd do a little video. We are on some stuff now where I had an A-B line, and we're planting right over top of the anhydrous strips, which seems to be working really well. I'm not sure if I mentioned it in a video previously, but I've been really happy with the way that's worked out. It seems like the row units ride pretty nice, being on that kind of softer, slightly tilled soil, and I think it should be good for fertility, or fertility efficiency, I guess maybe would be the word or the term that I should use. Well, that's not what you like to see when you're trying to beat a rain. It looks like we broke the pin. Looks fresh. That is really kind of weird, because I haven't hit anything with that marker that I know of, pretty sure, and it worked fine for most of that round. So I don't know if that means, see, that's going to be in the middle, be halfway between, there's the pin right there. If I have a bolt the right size, I think what I'm going to try to do is just grind this off and put a bolt through there and try to get done. I think that's going to be the fastest fix, definitely faster than trying to weld something in. Plus this whole marker is kind of a little sketchy anyway, which may have had something to do with this situation. I'm also debating if I can get away planting some without a marker. Probably that's not going to go well. I mean, I have the straight A-B lines here, but I don't have very much more of it, and I have a bunch of curves I need to plant too. So probably I'm going to have to fix it. Hopefully it'll be a half-hour fix or less, and nothing too serious. Got a plan. I looked all over, heck, trying to find a 7/8 bolt. Lots of 3/4, a little bit of 1-inch, 0 7/8 bolts anywhere in the shop, including in all the buckets of treasure spread around the farmstead. Then it occurred to me, we have another cycloplanter, which is older, but it seems that the plus of having a planter with crappy markers is that they use the same crappy markers for 20 years, something like that probably. And the bean planter, which is an 8-row, uses the exact same thing. So I was able to pop out 2 bolts and a pin, and I guess a clip on the chain deal, and have an identical piece without a busted pin. So I'm going to put that on, get back to planting, and I'll have to switch it back for the bean planter, but that seemed like the easiest solution at this point. The other plan was to run to town and try to find a 7/8 bolt. I probably could have tracked one down, but that was about when I figured out this solution. If I'd known I was going to dig all over the place trying to find one and not find one, I probably would have gone to town first, but it would have been smarter to just realize that I had a backup piece that I could steal. Anywho, hopefully we'll be back to planning soon. We should be back in business. We'll see how it works. I noticed there's a little bit of difference in where the bracket fits. I kind of wonder if part of the reason that that broke is at some point I think Dad had put washers in here to try to like adjust how the outer section laid in relation to the inner, mostly to keep the markers from getting into each other, folding up the planter. And I think that also like made a gap down here. I put a washer back in there. It's not wide enough to take up the slack, but that also would widen up like where these brackets lock onto the 3-inch wide tube. So that may have increased the shock load on that. It looked like the one on the other side had been welded, and I screwed up this marker 2 or 3 years ago. So like the tube on the top here on this one had been re-welded, but it looked like the pin on the other side had some work done on it. Once again, not the strongest suit of the cyclo planters of this era. There were certain configurations that I think they used a heavier marker on, but all of the vertical fold stuff, I think from the like late 70s to late 90s, I think, was when they stopped making the 955s. I think used pretty much the same style markers, and they're not great. The other happy side effect is that I was able to have my mom come get me at the field and then brought back the pickup with the rest of the seed. So I've got it here now, which probably means it's going to start raining and it's all going to get wet. But we'll hope that doesn't happen and continue to be a glass half full kind of guy. But get the seed at the field. Look at that beautiful right-hand marker. Almost thought I felt a sprinkle. Nothing on the radar as a few minutes ago. So some of this field is kind of steep and was farmed for quite a while without terraces on it, so it's not the best dirt. Because of that, I'm going to drop the population a little bit, save a little bit on seed cost, and keep the plants healthier if there's limited nutrients for the plant, or moisture potentially, if we're in a moisture deficit at some point. So the way that this works on this planter, everything is driven off the wheels on the wings. So the wheels out there have a chain that drives this shaft under the toolbar, and then it drives this chain, goes through a shaft to this chain, and then up to the stuff that actually drives the drums that determine how often it releases a seed. So to get different populations, you change out these sprockets and potentially switch the sprockets that the chains are on the other shafts. But for the most part, I try to just change these two. So what we're going to do right now is pull this sprocket off and switch it out, and then that'll lower our population. Basically, there's a nut right here with left-hand threads. So I have to think about it when I loosen this. And then the chain is loose. Then you just pop out this pin, which is easier to do with two hands, especially on this side where it's really tight against the tube for the step here. Then you whack that with your pliers once or twice to get the dirt knocked out of it. And then it should just slide right off. So that one was a 28, I need a 30, I believe. There's a 30. So we're gonna put that up there. Put our washer back on. Send back in. Our tightener, which I'm gonna have to do with two hands. keep some tension on it. You don't want the chain too tight, but you definitely want it tight enough that it's not going to slop. If it's too loose, you'll get jerkiness in the drum, which then will translate into uneven spacing. So I'm going to put the camera down and tighten this up and get back to going. Look at those nice straight rows right over top of the anhydrous tracks. Beautiful sight. I'm not done with this field yet, unfortunately. I'm just planted that way, and then I'm deadheaded back to where I did my initial pass or initial passes across the middle. This field, we plant everything off of some intakes on some terraces. Everything is spaced out on the other intakes so that if you get started right, you shouldn't have to swerve around the intakes very much, or the intakes should line up with the gaps between passes, which worked out pretty well, really. I'm also, since there's some chance of rain, I'm kind of strategically deciding where to plant to try to get as much done as possible, or at least not have a whole bunch of indrows planted if I get rained out. So I'm kind of doing the good running first, and then if I get the big part of the field done, then we'll work on the little patches. Because this field has quite a few waterways in some areas, so there's a lot of short passes and turning around and stuff that is good ground, but not the most efficient as far as acres per hour. So we're up to our marker pass from earlier, so we'll get things going. So this is a good example of deliberate terrace layout. So if you can see, there's an intake here and one here, and the pass is going to be right in between those, although I'll probably have to swerve a little. So there are different types of terraces, and the ones that we have around here mostly in our fields are broad base, which means you farm both sides of the terrace. They're not very steep, and then the intake is spaced out away. There are other types which use grass. We really like the broad base because you can farm across them and you don't have to worry about grass when you're spraying. I mean, like, to not kill anything. And because they are sorry, gotta make sure that we're engaged, and the tractor doesn't like our line very much. Now we're good. As I was saying, we like the broad base because you can farm across them, or you don't lose any field to the terracing process, and also you don't have random strips of grass out through the field, either on the bottom side or both sides in the case of like a narrow base. And like there's multiple reasons for that. Without grass in the field, you don't have to worry as much about wildlife taking up refuge in those grass strips. So you have less critters digging holes potentially, and you also don't have to worry as much about when you spray, making sure that you keep off of that grass on the terraces, or if you accidentally get some drift on it, killing off the grass and then having an erosion problem on a really steep slope. So there's different reasons for different stuff. A lot of the people that like the narrow base like that you have the intake right up against the grass, so then you can plant around it, and it maybe works better with a big planter, but we don't have a big planter and probably aren't going to get one anytime real soon. So I got to steer around the intake here. So for the most part, we came out okay, but we still have to sort of veer around them, both so that we don't hit the intake with the planter, and also ideally to try to keep the rows a little bit away from the intake so that we don't spear the intakes with a combine or a combining fall. So that the advantage of the narrow base terraces is mostly that the intake is up next to them, so you can plant up next to it and you don't have to worry about having a particular width of planter, but I've got enough stuff that's all laid out based on a 38-foot planter, and that's not a multiple of anything else, but I'm probably going to be stuck with a 12-row for a while. And I really think, with some of the trends towards the high speed probably there's not any reason that I'm gonna really want to go to a bigger planter in the short term. And at some point, probably it's going to be a swarm of autonomous 4-row planters or something like that you set off from the edge of the field and let go do their thing anyway, and it's not going to matter at that point. So the broad base, I guess, serves the purpose of stopping erosion, creating the water holding capacity. So you can see there's kind of a bowl shape, and that's kind of the key trait of any terrace system, is having that short-term water holding, so that instead of having all the water that you can see up this way concentrating down through small areas, you have the dams to catch small areas of water and then drain that out over time, hours or days, and reduce the erosion by not having all of that water build up a head of steam going down the hill and create huge gullies at the bottom. So that's kind of the thought process on some of the conservation stuff here. We kind of try to take a multifaceted approach. Just out the window here, you can also see some grass waterways, the lighter green there, and then the darker green, but kind of sparse, is some cereal rye that I seeded through areas that are kind of higher erosion potential. So all of that cereal rye will get Roundup sprayed sooner than later, but I'll ideally try to give it a few days to kind of recover from being run over by the planter, just to make sure that anything that we kind of covered up or buried a little bit has a chance to grow up so that the herbicide hits it and it dies. But the waterways, the darker green or the lighter green, where you can kind of, it's lighter green because there's dead grass there from last year essentially. And you can maybe see it a little bit better out the back window here, other than the markers in the way. But all of those are permanent, so that grass is all perennial. Will come back year after year, and those are just low-lying areas where terraces aren't really practical with the road direction, or because there's too much water coming through. That is another way to kind of control erosion by having that perennial vegetation where the water flows. That kind of protects the soil underneath the grass, where you have the sod layer, so that where a lot of water comes down through those low spots doesn't wash out, and you also have the vegetation from the grass to kind of hopefully catch some of the suspended soil particles in any runoff as well. Got about 10 acres left, and it's starting to look kind of dark in the west. I'm hoping that I can get this finished. I'm not sure. The radar looked like the bulk of the system was still a ways away, but that there was maybe like a tiny cell pretty close, so maybe there's a chance we get a little shower, but I can keep going without it being too muddy. Just have to see what happens. We are finishing up in some sprinkles, but as long as we make it these next 5 feet, and we are off and hopefully done planting corn for the year. The radar looks like it's going to rain pretty good, and it definitely looks pretty dark to the southwest here. I'm hoping that I can get home without getting too wet, but we'll see. Looks like we're going to get a little break, I would guess. Unless it doesn't rain as much as the radar would indicate to my eye. I've not been studying it very close because I've mostly been trying to plant. But the good news is we got done with corn. I don't know why, but it seems like every time I plant this field, I'm trying to race against the weather. I finished up actually this little hillside right over here last year, just about, there's maybe 2 or 3 acres there in the rain, and I was steering with the brakes, but it was supposed to rain for quite a few days thereafter, and I was really trying to get done, but I paid for it when I had to clean up the planter because it was a freaking disaster. So fortunately we avoided that today, and I probably would not have pushed the envelope quite that hard planting corn, and especially since the general forecast is still relatively dry and warm at this point. but it looks like we're gonna get some rain today at least. So probably might be it for today, or at least it for field work, I would guess. I made it home, didn't get too wet. Need to do some cleanup on the planter. Got the seed release wheels off the drums. I need to drain the seed out, spray some graphite on the front surface here where the seal on the drum rubs against it, so that it doesn't rust, especially since it just got rained on a little bit. But it looks like I came out pretty much exact on seed. There's nothing left in the hoppers, it's all in the drum. So I hope that doesn't mean that I have a whole bunch of skips in the last couple of passes, but I guess we'll find out what the situation is on that in a couple weeks. In the immediate term, it looks like I probably need to give my dad a hand. He was in a hurry to haul some of his corn today, and it looked like there's a nice pile on the driveway, so I'm gonna help him shovel that, I guess, probably, since it's raining, and having corn get rained on is less than ideal. It's about 5:40. Got some lunch at 5 o'clock, and came back out to clean up the planter and a little bit and stuff. It did look like one of my drums was pretty much completely out of seed. I mean, it wasn't completely out because the monitor wasn't going off, but there wasn't very much in there. So I hope I don't have a problem. I think where I finished up was planting on the left side of the planter for some point rows, so at least that part got filled in. And the hybrid that I was using has a lot of ear flex, which basically means that the ear can get bigger or smaller depending on the growing conditions. So hopefully, even if I have some gaps, it'll be able to fill in without having too much effect on anything. And it continues to rain. So this was supposed to be like 1/10 of an inch or less today, and then 1/10 to 1/4 tonight. And I checked the rain gauge before I walked back out to the shed here, and we'd gotten 3/10 so far. And it looked like there's quite a bit more on the radar. And I don't know exactly like where the National Weather Service draws the line between today and tonight, but it looks like we might be out of the field for a couple of days or so maybe. It's supposed to be pretty warm and sunny, I believe, both tomorrow and Sunday. So I'm hoping that we can get back to doing something. Not sure if I'll plant beans or try to do some spraying. Might depend on a little bit what the forecast looks like a few days out, or how things change in the next 24 or 48 hours. But plenty to do, so I'll try to keep taking video when the opportunity arises.